The middle toe of this bird carries a claw 5 inches long. It does not retract, and it does not blunt. The bird stands as tall as a man. It outruns you over open ground. It swims across rivers, and it kicks at the height of your stomach. And guides in that forest, listen for something other than leaves. A low boom at the very edge of hearing that the bird makes with its chest. It lives on an island where 10 million people speak around 840 living languages. Walk 12 miles along one ridge, and your speech turns into a set of untranslatable sounds. Neighbors here do not understand neighbors. Near the end, we will get to a reel of film shot in 1930. It holds the face of a man in the moment he learns that the world does not stop at his mountains. Think back to the atlas on your school desk. The continents are colored in, the rivers are labeled, and not one blank space is left. One thing follows from that map. The age of great discovery closed somewhere in the 19th century, and after that, only the details needed filling in. Name a year to yourself, the year you believe the last large people on Earth first learned that anyone else was out there. Hold that number. We come back to it. The second question sits less comfortably. You are used to the idea that knowledge accumulates, and that the closer we come to our own time, the more humanity can do. Yet roughly 1 language leaves this island every year, and with it goes everything that language knew about forest plants and about the signs of rising water. None of it is written down in any book. Does knowledge accumulate, or does it get spent? And the third, you are certain that machinery beats any old skill. Then explain why a family that puts up a house 100 feet above the ground, with no nails, no drawing, and not a single measurement, finishes the job before a helicopter can reach them. Start with the number. 840 living languages is more than 1/10 of every language on Earth, packed into an area a little larger than Sweden. All of Europe counts fewer than 300. On average, one language here belongs to about 12,000 people. The population of a small country town speaks its own tongue, with no writing system, no dictionary, and no neighbors able to follow it. Most people put this down to the mountains. The ranges run across the island. The valleys are separated by walls 6,000 and 10,000 feet high, and no roads were ever cut between them. Port Moresby, the capital, still has no road link to the rest of the country. You arrive by plane or by sea. 6 hours of climbing wet clay can separate 2 villages, and that is enough for speech to drift apart. On a trail like that, the morning air is thick and warm. Your shirt never dries. Red clay slides under your boots. By midday, the ridge sends down cold.
You hear shouting in the next valley. You catch the intonation. You can tell from the voice that a man is calling someone by name, and you do not understand a single word. Here is where the real point hides. The gap between 2 of these languages is usually deeper than the gap between English and Chinese. What sits here are not dialects of one root that drifted apart over 2 centuries. The specialists of the Summer Institute of Linguistics, who maintain the Ethnologue catalog, sort the languages of the island into several dozen families unrelated to one another. And on top of that comes a handful of isolates with no relatives anywhere on the planet. The valleys did not separate people for centuries. They separated them for thousands of years. And every valley had time to build its own language from nothing. For the country to function at all, 3 official languages grew over the top. And the main one is Tokpisin, built from English words on local grammar.
In it, the hair on your head is called the grass that belongs to the head. Parliament, the courts, and the radio all run on this stripped-down speech, because otherwise members from different provinces cannot hear each other. And in dozens of local languages, there is a separate word for a sound the ear can barely catch. People feel it in the breastbone. Anyone raised in these forests reacts at once and steps off the trail. The boom comes from a cassowary. Its call sits at the bottom edge of human hearing, and counts as the lowest sound known in any bird. Low waves travel farther than high ones in dense forest and bend around trunks, so two birds hear each other through hundreds of yards of solid green, while a man 20 paces away sees nothing but leaves. A grown cassowary reaches 5 feet and weighs up to 130 pounds. By weight, only the ostrich outranks it among birds. It carries a bony helmet on its head. The skin of its neck is blue and bare, and on the middle toe sits that claw, 5 inches long as a kitchen knife and sharpened along the lower edge. The bird does not strike with its beak. It jumps and throws the foot forward and down, opening up whatever lies on the line from your thigh to your chest. On level ground, a cassowary reaches 30 miles an hour. That is the speed of a car on a city street, and the bird holds it in undergrowth where you would not manage 10 steps. It clears an obstacle taller than itself and swims a river if the river is in the way. The one documented human death from a cassowary in Australia in the first half of the 20th century dates to 1926. A teenager tried to finish off a bird and took a kick to the neck. The attack reviews carried out by Kirschbaum and his co-authors on Australian museum material give an unexpected picture. Almost every clash happens where the birds have been taught to take food from people. A wild cassowary leaves first, as soon as it hears footsteps. What makes the bird dangerous is the habit of being fed. It stops keeping its distance, walks up to a person on its own, and demands what it thinks it is owed. Walking into that forest under a fruiting tree is unpleasant. The smell of fermenting pulp hangs there. Your feet sink into crushed fruit. A humming cloud of gnats sits over your head, and in that mess, you will not hear a 130-pound bird coming toward you. The fruit is what brings the cassowary in. It swallows the fruit whole, stone and all, and carries the seeds of more than 100 tree species hundreds of yards from the parent trunk. Some of those plants have fruit too large for anything else on the island to swallow. The most dangerous bird on the planet holds up half the understory of this forest, and where it has been shot out, the forest grows back within a generation as something else. A man who walks this forest every day fears the cassowary far less than one day in the year. On that day, they lay him down on the floor, and the older men pick up a bamboo blade. He goes there himself and asks them to begin. The Sepik runs more than 700 miles across the north of the country, spreads for miles in the wet season, and shifts its channel so readily that villages move with the water. Spirit houses stand along its banks, long buildings with a high roof that no woman may enter. A boy is brought there in his teens and left for weeks. Initiation goes through scarification. Hundreds of short cuts are opened across the back, the shoulders, and the chest with a bamboo or a razor blade, set out in rows. Clay and tree oil are rubbed into the wounds so they close over as rough, raised welts instead of smooth skin. The pattern copies crocodile hide. In the logic of the rite, the crocodile swallows the boy and lets out a man, so the scar has to look like the mark of teeth on a body. It heals for months. Through the first weeks, the man lies in the smoke of a fire that keeps the flies off, sleeps on his side, and cannot lean his back against anything. The anthropologist Silverman, who worked through the rites of the Middle Sepik in his study of manhood and motherhood, describes the initiation as a long process with several stages rather than one painful evening. From outside, it reads as decoration or as a test of endurance. It works another way. The welts on a man's back are the one document this whole society can read at a glance. The pattern shows which clan he comes from, which stage he has passed, and who answers for him. That document cannot be bought, lost, or forged, and a man without it stays a boy at any age. Go back for a second to the second question. This entire system is written only in living people, and no copy of it exists. In the Southern Highlands, 370 miles to the southwest, the same question is answered in reverse. Huli men do not cut skin. They grow hair. A teenager moves to a separate settlement and lives there for about 18 months under strict rules. He sleeps on a wooden neck rest so the hair is not crushed, sprinkles it 3 times a day with water from a sacred spring, keeps food restrictions, and stays away from women. After 18 months, the hair is cut off and sewn into a wig, dense and wide, curved like a roof. It is colored with ochre, edged with yellow clay, and set with the feathers of birds of paradise. About 30 species of those birds live on the island, more than anywhere else on Earth, and the plumes of one male are handed down in a family across generations. At a festival, you are looking at a man with his face washed in yellow and his own hair on his head, grown to a schedule over a year and a half. All of it holds as long as there is a village nearby that can read both the welt and the wig. And 430 miles west, across a national border, in low swamp forest, live people with no spirit houses and nothing that everyone wears in common. They have the forest, and they have height. The Korowai live in the swamp forest of the western half of the island, on flat ground where dry land is scarce. They were found late. The first outsiders reached these places only in the middle of the 1970s, and even now the trip takes days. A plane to a dirt strip, then a boat upriver, then walking knee-deep in water. The whole group is estimated at around 3,000 people. They build the house on a living tree. The trunk is stripped of branches at the working height and becomes the central post. A frame of poles is lashed around it. The floor is laid from sago palm bark. The walls and roof are closed with leaves. There is not one nail. Everything holds on rattan loops pulled tight by hand. There is no drawing either, and nobody measures anything. The length of a pole is judged by an arm span, the height of the post by eye from the ground. An ordinary house of this kind goes up 25 to 40 feet, the level of a 3rd or 4th floor. Individual builds have gone to 100 feet. 100 feet is a 9-story building whose roof you reach by a notched pole instead of a staircase. Up there, the floor moves under your weight and cracks at every step, but the air is drier and cooler, and the cloud of gnats hanging over the water below never climbs that high. A family assembles a house like this in a few days. The third question from the opening gets its first answer here. A skill, sharpened over generations for one particular forest, beats machinery that still has to fly to that forest. Inside, right on the bark floor, sits a square clay pad for the fire. It hangs on its own set of vines, and if flames start to spread, the pad is cut loose and the whole fire drops through with the coals into the water. People living 100 feet above the ground in a building made of dry leaves worked out exactly this scenario. The height is usually explained by gnats and floods. The reason runs deeper. A treehouse is hard to take by surprise. You cannot approach it quietly. The ladder is pulled up at night, and from above you see anyone who steps into the water 200 paces out. At the same time, this housing does not last. In a few years, the family moves on. The rattan rots, the bark comes apart, and after 2 or 3 seasons, nothing is left in the tree. The tallest houses ever raised by human hands without a single tool leave no trace behind them. A treehouse stands as long as the tree stands. Far to the northeast, on a separate island, there is a town where the ground itself stopped holding. Rabaul sits on the shore of Simpson Harbor, and the harbor is the flooded crater of an old volcano about 9 miles across. Smaller cones stick up around its rim. 2 of them are called Tavurvur and Vulcan. They face each other across the water, and the town was built exactly between them. The harbor counted as the finest in this part of the Pacific, deep, sheltered from storms, with berths ready to use. On the 29th of May, 1937, the ground under the town began to shake, and a column of ash rose on the Vulcan's side. In a single day, a cone 600 feet high grew where a low island had been. 507 people died. Lava took only a minority of them. Most of the deaths came from what followed. Ash mixed with rain and settled on the roofs in a wet layer heavy as fresh cement. After that disaster, a volcano observatory opened in Rabaul. Its staff watched both cones for more than 40 years and recorded every tremor in the ground. In the early 80s, the floor of the caldera started rising again. That time, there was no eruption, but an evacuation plan was written and rehearsed with the population. On the 19th of September, 1994, both cones went off at once. People began leaving at night before the first blast because they felt the tremors and remembered what they had been taught. The death toll came to a handful. The town, though, ceased to exist. Ash buried the streets almost 3 feet deep. The airfield vanished under a gray field. Roofs folded one after another, and the provincial capital had to be moved to nearby Kokopol. Ash soaked with rain weighs about as much as wet sand. An ordinary roof does not carry that load. It sags slowly, with cracking sounds, and comes down after the eruption is already over. Sulfur hangs in the air. Gray dust grinds between your teeth and cuts your eyes, and what you hear is a long hiss, as if gravel were being poured out somewhere close and never stopping. People came back. They took the outskirts, right at the edge of the ash field. They plant gardens in that soil. They rebuilt the port. They walk tourists up to a smoking tavurvur that threw ash again in 2014. In '94, they were saved by memory rather than by instruments. Thousands of people knew from their parents what had happened in '37, and they left before any signal was given. 7 years before that second eruption, in January of '42, Japanese ships came into this harbor. Rabaul became the main base in the south, and from there the troops moved on toward the southern coast of the island. A few months later, a 24-year-old private from Melbourne meets them on a mountain track, and whether the pass holds will depend on what he does in 1 minute. The Kokoda track runs 86 miles across the Owen Stanley Range. Its two ends are less than 60 miles apart in a straight line, but nothing on it is straight. The track climbs and drops so many times that the total ascent adds up to miles of vertical. The high point is around 7,200 feet. In places, the path is under a yard wide, wall on one side, drop on the other. In July of 1942, Japanese units came down it from north to south, heading for Port Moresby. The 39th Battalion, militia, went up to meet them. Untrained boys, many of them not yet 19, carrying weapons from the previous war. Their orders were simple: do not let them through. They held for 4 months, falling back ridge by ridge and fighting for every bend in the track. On the 29th of August, the position at the village of Isurava started to come apart, and Private Bruce Kingsbury went forward alone with a light machine gun against the group that had broken in. He opened a gap, the line was restored, and a sniper on the nearest rock killed him a minute later. Kingsbury received the Victoria Cross, the first awarded for an action on territory administered by Australia. At 7,000 feet, the temperature at night falls close to freezing, and the uniforms were tropical cotton that did not dry for weeks. The mud stood knee-deep underfoot, boots fell apart in 2 weeks, feet rotted, leeches worked their way under the puttees, and on top of dysentery came malaria and scrub typhus, a tick-borne fever that burned a man out in days. Across the campaign, far more men were lost to sickness than to wounds and bullets. The wounded were carried out by Papuan bearers, the men the Australians called the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. One stretcher took 8 of them. The way down ran for several days, and the whole time the bearer walked that same clay with the weight on his shoulder. On the 25th of December, 42, the photographer George Silk caught one of them. Raphael Oimbari leading a blinded private, George Whittington, by the hand. The picture went around the world. Whittington died in February of the following year, of that same tick fever. Japanese maps showed a road across the range. No road existed. Under that symbol lay a footpath that local people used to walk to neighboring villages. The advance was planned around moving artillery and supply columns. There was nowhere to move them, and supply broke down 2 weeks after the climb began. Hunger started in the Japanese units before the ammunition ran out. The cameraman, Damien Perrer, filmed this track with the camera on his shoulder, walking with the battalion. His picture about the front line at Kokoda played in cinemas, and in 1943, it won an Academy Award, the first in the history of Australian film. Today, the track is open only by permit, with a registered group and a local guide, and people walk it in 8 to 10 days. In those same months, about 60 miles to the north, a plane was circling over a swamp with its fuel running out. It would be found 30 years later and pulled out 30 years after that. On the 23rd of February, 42, a B-17 bomber took off to hit Japanese shipping in that same harbor at Rabaul.
The bomb bay doors failed over the target. The crew turned and came in a second time, took anti-aircraft fire and fighters, and on the way back, the fuel ran out over the northern coast. Below lay a flat yellow plane. The pilot, Fred Eaton, took it for a field of dry grass and put the aircraft down on its belly. Under the grass was the Agayambo swamp. The machine, with a wingspan over 100 feet, roughly the height of the tallest Korowai house, settled onto the water, almost undamaged, and stayed upright. 9 crewmen climbed out into grass taller than a man, in warm water up to their chests, without one patch of dry ground for miles in any direction. They walked for 6 weeks. In a straight line, the coast lay a distance you would drive in an hour. Kunai grass cuts skin along the edge of the blade. The swamp water holds the temperature of a warm bath. There is nowhere to sleep, and the mosquitoes come in a solid layer.
All 9 reached villages. All 9 came down with malaria, and all 9 were taken out. The aircraft stayed where it landed. The strangest part of the story starts there. The swamp preserved the machine. Fresh water and silt sealed the aluminum off from the air. No scrap collectors and no locals with tools ever got to the site. And the bomber stood in the bog for more than 60 years, almost intact. Guns in place, instruments in the cockpit, a thermos of coffee left behind by the crew. The thing that would not let the aircraft out is the thing that kept it whole. It was found again only in '72 from an Australian Army helicopter. Another 30-odd years later, the machine was taken apart and lifted out of the swamp by helicopter, then shipped to the United States, where it now stands in an aviation museum. There were lawsuits over it. Part of the province considered the swamp ghost theirs and did not want it taken away.
While the crew was working its way out to people, they collected an observation that got retold more often than the landing itself. In some villages, they were looked at calmly. In others, grown adults were seeing a white man for the first time in their lives. And this was 1942. To understand where that difference comes from in the middle of the 20th century, we go back 12 years. In 1930, a gold prospector named Michael Leahy went up into the central highlands of the island with a partner. On the maps, that area was marked as a solid mountain barrier, uninhabited and impassable. It was assumed that behind the coastal strip, the ranges ran bare and nobody could live there. Leahy was after gold rather than discovery. His brother Dan joined him later. In the evening, they made camp on a ridge. After dark, lights came on in the valley below. Not 2 of them, and not 10.
Hundreds of fires, row after row, out to the far edge of the valley, and by those fires it became clear that densely settled land lay underneath. By later estimates, about 1 million people lived in the highlands, none of whom knew that anyone existed beyond their mountains. In the morning, people came out to meet them. They wept, they shook, and they touched the newcomers on the skin. In their understanding, white arrivals could only be spirits of the dead come back from the other side. To check whether these beings were alive, local men went to look at their latrine. A spirit does not leave behind what a person leaves behind. The white men passed the test. Leahy carried a movie camera. He shot film and he shot stills, and those frames survive. The first minutes of two worlds meeting, recorded from inside the meeting. In 1983, Bob Connolly and Robin Anderson found old men in the same valleys who had been children in 30 and remembered all of it. Sat them in front of a screen and ran that footage. People recognized themselves. 4 years later came their book, First Contact, assembled from two versions of one event, the notes of the prospectors and the accounts of the people who met them. Think of the year you named at the start. 1930. Transatlantic passenger flight had begun. Radio was working. Films had sound. And 1 million people had no idea the outside world existed while living 2 weeks on foot from a coast that European ships had been visiting for a century and a half. Total isolation, though, is not what this was. Chains of trade had run down from the highlands to the sea for centuries, and seashells came up along them. Mountain people valued them above everything and kept them as the main wealth for a marriage or a payment. Where the shells came from, nobody up there knew. Leahy paid for food and labor with exactly those shells, bringing them in by the sackful, and within a few years, a store of value built over generations was worthless. The people who had just met outsiders received from them the first collapse of their own currency in their history. Valley by valley, the highlands went on being opened for another 3 decades, and the last groups met the outside world in the 60s and 70s. 1 million people is a large figure, and individual faces get lost behind it. So we come down from that scale to one person and one language that nobody speaks except him and a few hundred others. Of the 840 languages in the country, dozens exist in fewer than 1,000 speakers. Some are counted in hundreds of people, some in dozens. UNESCO estimates, gathered in its Atlas of Languages in Danger, place this island among the worst cases in the world, and on average, about one language here disappears every year. It goes quietly. An elderly woman dies, and after the funeral, nobody in the village remembers the words of the songs. A vocabulary is the smallest part of what leaves with a language. What goes is the description of one specific piece of forest. Which bark stops bleeding? Which vine holds drinking water? Which bird call tells you rain has started upstream and the river will rise 10 feet in 2 hours? None of this is written down. None of it is duplicated anywhere. And it does not translate whole into Tok Pisin, because Tok Pisin has no words for half of it. A person raised in a city will not notice the loss. The one who notices walks into that forest 20 years from now and cannot survive a week. The forest itself has not been fully surveyed. Mount Bosavi rises in the southern highlands to 8,200 feet, an extinct volcano whose middle collapsed inward. What was left is a crater about 2.5 miles across, with walls up to 3,300 feet. To climb straight out of it, you would have to go up the height of 3 Eiffel Towers standing one on top of another. People go down into it from a helicopter. In 2009, an expedition went in with a team from the BBC. Inside the crater, in a few weeks, they described more than 40 species unknown to science. Frogs, fish, bats, and a rat about 2.5 feet long, including the tail, weighing 3 pounds. The rat did not run. It walked up to the people on its own, because in its whole life, it had never met a human being, and did not know it was supposed to leave. Conservation International expeditions to the Foja Mountains in the western part of the island in 2005 and 2008 produced much the same result.
And here the second question closes on its own. Knowledge does not accumulate evenly. In one place it comes in. In the Bosavi crater, the list of species known to science grew by 40 entries in a few weeks. In another place, at the same time, it goes for good. And it goes faster than it arrives, because a new frog can be described in a week, while recording one language with its whole system of signs takes years of work and one person willing to spend them. What nobody knows is the final balance. How many systems of knowledge have already gone from this island before anyone managed to write down even a word list cannot be established. No speakers are left, no texts, no names. Now, a question for you.
The swamp ghost was pulled out of the bog and taken across an ocean where tens of thousands of people a year see it, and part of the province held that the aircraft should have stayed where it landed because it lay on their ground and had become part of their history. Where does it belong? In a museum across an ocean, or in the swamp? Write in the comments whose side you take and why. If stories like this one are what you come here for, subscribe to the channel